scum of the earth from beautiful Costa Rica. I just finished bicycle touring through Nicaragua, and in this video I'm going to be addressing if Nicaragua is safe to travel. So, before entering the country, I'd heard that Nicaragua was in a state of civil unrest. Now, as to the specific details of why that is, and I'm not the foremost expert, but one of the main reasons that I heard a few times was that related to social securities. So the age that people would receive their pensions, the Nicaraguans that were promised pensions, was pushed back, and this may have been kind of a like the spark to a keg that was maybe already filling up with ammunition to blow. So following that, there was protests and demonstrations. Mostly in the big cities of capital city of Managua, Granada, Masaya, but some other towns that I ended up passing through as well, like Diriamba, Jinotepe, and Rivas. The last three I passed through. And during those protests, there were hundreds of people, like 300 or so, that were killed. At least from what I was hearing, and again, I'm not an expert, I don't proclaim to know exactly the details of the situation. We're saying that that potentially the government was involved in killing protesters and stuff like that. So the UN was in Nicaragua and things like that. So yeah, so because of that kind of situation, all the tourists most of the tourists that were planning to go to Nicaragua or were in Nicaragua left. I spoke to many of them. So Nicaragua was next up on my list of countries to visit on this bicycle tour. So as for the protests, well, I mean, I guess the murders and stuff like that, it seemed that they were really mostly taking place in during those protests and stuff like that became violent. So I figured if I stayed clear of that, that I shouldn't have too many issues. The other thing was that as a form of protest, people were erecting roadblocks on major highways and stuff like that, just to kind of raise awareness of the situation. So they'd make like every 20 minutes they would let a car pass, but this would still create huge lineups, and with the amount of cars lined up, you'd be waiting for hours before you could pass. So that was a little worrying as well, but I had been through roadblocks in Chiapas, kind of getting off my bike and casually walking around them. So I figured if they didn't look too violent, I didn't hear any violence coming from the roadblocks, that I would be okay. So yeah, and also I'd heard that previously to this, Nicaragua was considered the safest country in Central America. So I don't think that this situation specifically would just make everyone turn bad and violent all of a sudden, although it could for some people. Because whenever people feel that, or at least bad people, or people that are inclined to do crime, feel that maybe things are chaotic and the police aren't really paying attention to anything, or they can't be trusted maybe, then they would take advantage of that situation to maybe do some robbing or something. So again, with that in mind, I felt like me being a tourist, you know, I'm not the a target for the civil unrest. You know, it's the government kind of, and the people being in disagreement, or mostly the people being in disagreement with the government, it seemed. So I felt it was safe enough for me to travel to through Nicaragua, and I was going to avoid kind of the major epicenters of protests and violence, which were Managua, Masaya, and Granada. So my trajectory through Nicaragua was, I went to the Somoto Canyon, went to Esteli, National Park Miraflor, then the city of Leon, and then Diriamba, Jinotepe, Rivas, and then kind of prematurely left to Costa Rica just to play it safe. So I didn't see Ometepe in the big lake, the Ometepe, Volcano Ometepe in the Lake of Nicaragua in the south, or San Juan del Sur. This was just playing it safe, and yeah, because I didn't feel especially kind of in danger or anything. I was actually lucky enough to not encounter any roadblocks, and I think what my strategy was was just talking to people, talking to other travelers, talking to locals as much as I could, because some people will exaggerate the situation and then some people will underplay it. So if the more people you ask, the more you have a really good idea of, you know, potentially what the actual situation is. And that really helped me. When I was in Esteli, I was talking to the hostel owner, and he happened to know that the roads were going to be blocked the next day. So this didn't really inconvenience me. So I just stayed and booked another day at the hostel, worked on my videos, and it was no problem. And then the next day I was good to go, and I didn't have to wait in any roadblocks. And then when I got to Leon, talking around, they said, yeah, things are a little different here. The vibe's a little darker. You know, don't go out, you know, after 6 p.m. There's kind of been an increase in robbings and stuff like that. At least that was their perception. So I didn't do that. I didn't go out late after dark, which I don't normally do regardless. It's kind of a good travel strategy to avoid going out late if you're alone. Yeah, so no problems in Leon. But once I was in Leon, I knew this is where I could potentially face some things. So I was going to go through Diriamba, Jinotepe, and Rivas, which were all towns that were kind of had created roadblocks and that were really protesting the government pretty intensely, and they were sites where violence had happened. So I was a little bit worried about that. But I was talking to an actual fellow bicycle tourist, and he had done a lot more research than I had on the subject, so I chatted with him, and he happened to know that you know, they had really cleared the roadblocks and the government was in there trying to prevent that because they were blocking the Pan American Highway, which is a pretty important highway for business and stuff like that for the country. So the government was making sure that it was open. So hearing that, and that there hadn't been any roadblocks in the last few days, that I decided to go. And it was fine, it was clear. When I got to Rivas, which is the last big town in Nicaragua, there was a huge protest just downtown, so you couldn't really go around the city, but I found a hotel on the outside of the city, and it was mostly a peaceful protest. And also on the way there was a huge caravan of like 100 cars, and some of them had like pickup trucks with masked men's with AK-47s and stuff like that, but there was also a lot of people giving me the peace sign. So I guess a peaceful protest, an armed peaceful protest, I guess. But they weren't blocking the road, they were just all in one lane on the opposite lane. And in that moment, again, I wasn't fearful because I'm not the target of aggression as a tourist. Yeah, so everything worked out pretty good for me, but despite that, I decided to not kind of push my luck and head into Costa Rica, simply because in a situation like that with the country where the people want the government kind of out and the government is kind of resisting that, then things have the potential to get, you know, real ugly real fast. Not saying that it will, but it could. So I was just, you know, playing it safe. So for the viewer watching this video, considering going to Nicaragua, you'll most likely be watching this video quite some time after I was actually in Nicaragua, which is mid to late July 2018. So I would definitely recommend that you update yourself on what the current situation is. I find the best way to do this would be to do a Google search. Just write Nicaragua, and then change your settings to only receive Spanish results. At the time of this recording, you do this on the top right corner of the Google screen. And then usually right at the top of the results, there's kind of like a carousel of recent news stories. So you can read through that, and oh yeah, so you click on the story and then you would use your browser to translate. So I know Chrome can do this, where you go click on the top right corner of your browser and have it translate to English. Because if you're just reading, you know, English stories or some other language from your country, then it might be very general and not really specific and up to date. So if you get Spanish results, you're probably going to get more up-to-date stories and more specific local stories and stuff like that about the situation. So that should give you better results. You can also join some Facebook groups, like expats in Nicaragua and other local Facebook groups that might give you some up-to-date information. And people often ask questions, and there's some people that are knowledgeable there to answer questions. You definitely have to take what's said in those groups with a grain of salt. I was reading the Expats in Nicaragua group, and seemed to be a lot of people being hyperbolic and some people underplaying. So like I said, don't take every word as the absolute truth, but you can still derive some information from it. So finally, if you should travel to Nicaragua, I say if you absolutely need to, you can do it, and you'll probably be safe if you're careful and you do a lot of research. But if you're just thinking of Nicaragua for like a vacation or something, and you're doing your research and you read that there's still violence and roadblocks and chaotic things and things of that nature, I would definitely recommend going somewhere else, and then maybe leaving Nicaragua on your wish list for in the future, because it's definitely a beautiful country worth visiting. But again, I would wait for maybe a calmer time, because there's a ton of beautiful places in Central America, like El Salvador and Mexico, like the state of Oaxaca, a personal favorite for me. And my YouTube channel has a ton of videos of me bicycle touring and visiting stuff all through Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, well, a little bit of Honduras, and yeah, now Costa Rica. And this is all part of my bicycle tour from Canada to Argentina.